Next paper is Vascular Surgery in Low and Middle Income Countries from the University of California in San Diego, presented by Dr. Ben Sheikh.
Hi everyone, my name is Nisma Ben Sheikh. I'm a second-year medical student at UC San Diego, and today I'll be discussing vascular surgery in low and middle income countries. We have no relevant disclosures, so we'll get right into it. Vascular surgery is one of the newest specialties worldwide, but despite being one of the newest specialties, it has undergone a rapid and incredible development. From robotic-assisted laparoscopic surgery to fiber optic technology, the developments have occurred in leaps and bounds. These technological advancements have played an integral role in reducing the disability and mortality attributable to cardiovascular disease. These developments, however, have not been even across the globe, with low and middle income countries continuing to bear a disproportionate burden of disease while not benefiting from the same technological advancements. Additionally, there has been a real shift in recent years with non-communicable diseases such as cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and COPD now making up 2/3 of causes of mortality globally. 4/5 of these mortalities occur in low and middle income countries. Peripheral artery disease, for example, has seen a 29% increase between 2000 and 2010 in low and middle income countries, over double the increase seen in high income countries in the same time period. A similar trend can be seen with regards to ischemic stroke, which continues to have a higher incidence in low and middle income countries. While we have seen a decrease in incidence and prevalence in high-income countries with regards to ischemic stroke, the same cannot be said of low-income countries, which have seen a more moderate decrease and even an increase in some regions. Similarly, with regards to aortic aneurysm, as you can see here, there has been a steep decline in high-income countries, while low- and middle-income countries have remained relatively stable or even increased. With an increase in vascular pathology coupled with the incredible and versatile skill that vascular surgeons bring to the OR, it seems to be imminent to have a vascular surgery team within any healthcare system. Our objectives with our review were threefold. The first was to measure the burden of cardiovascular disease globally, focusing on aortic aneurysm, ischemic stroke, and peripheral artery disease. Second, to quantify global access to vascular surgeons. And third, to identify challenges and solutions to addressing any disparities that we might encounter. In order to accomplish these objectives, we utilized a combination of methods. In order to quantify the global burden of disease, we utilized the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation Global Burden of Diseases tool using data that was collected in 2019. We focused our analysis on aortic aneurysm, ischemic stroke, and peripheral artery disease, but included other communicable and non-communicable diseases in our analysis, which are mainstays in global health discourse. We quantified the global burden of disease in terms of both deaths as well as disability-adjusted life years, or DALYs. DALYs are a calculation of the years of healthy life lost due to premature mortality or disability. So, for example, one DALY would be equivalent to 1 year of healthy life lost. In order to quantify global access to vascular surgeons, we utilized population data from the World Bank, as well as data from the Cardiothoracic Surgery Network and the Society for Vascular Surgery. These data are presented in frequencies and percentages. Finally, we completed a thorough literature review using PubMed. Identified publications were categorized according to their main subject, according to the categories seen here. Moving into our results, we found that aortic aneurysms account for 0.3% of deaths globally and 0.1% of DALYs. Ischemic stroke accounted for 5.8% of deaths and 2.5% of DALYs, and peripheral artery disease accounted for 0.1% of deaths and 0.06% of DALYs globally. Combined, these three diseases account for a greater percentage of deaths and DALYs than is attributable to malaria and HIV/AIDS, both of which are diseases that tend to make up a large proportion of global health efforts. We then separated according to World Bank defined income levels in order to more exactly assess the burden of disease. In upper middle income countries, we found that aortic aneurysms, ischemic stroke, and peripheral artery disease made up a combined 9.1% of deaths and 4.6% of dailies. In lower middle income countries, we found that the three diseases made up 4.3% of deaths and 1.7% of dailies. And finally, we found that aortic aneurysm, ischemic stroke, and peripheral artery disease accounted for 2.2% of deaths and 0.8% of dailies in low-income countries. We also wanted to look at the trends that can be seen between 1990 and 2019 attributable to ischemic stroke, peripheral artery disease, and aortic aneurysms. With regards to ischemic stroke, as you can see here, the rate of dailies only increased overall in high-income countries, with the rest of the income level regions seeing overall increase during this time period. And the same trend continues with regards to deaths attributable to ischemic stroke. With regards to the rate of dailies attributable to peripheral artery disease, we saw an increase across all income levels. However, upper middle income countries had the highest percentage increase. And the same can be said of rate of deaths attributable to peripheral artery disease. And finally, with regards to the rate of dailies attributable to aortic aneurysm, as you can see here, high-income countries did see a decrease there in the middle, but overall saw a minor increase between 1990 and 2019. The only income level that was found to have decreased during this time period was low-income countries, with all the middle-income countries seeing an increase during this time period. And the same can be seen with regards to the rate of deaths attributable to aortic aneurysms. We then attempted to quantify access to vascular surgeons globally using the number of vascular surgeons per 10 million population as a measure of this access. As you can see here, the United States has 101 vascular surgeons per 10 million population. This is 10 times as many vascular surgeons per 10 million population when compared to countries such as Morocco and Iran. This number goes up to 16 times as many vascular surgeons when compared to South Africa, and a staggering 404 times as many vascular surgeons per 10 million population when compared to Ethiopia. As with any study, ours had its limitations. Primary among them is the fact that aortic aneurysm, ischemic stroke, and peripheral artery disease are by no means comprehensive of cardiovascular diseases. So in fact, the global burden of disease is underestimated in our study, and the need for vascular surgeons globally is understated, in fact. Another limitation that we came across was that global vascular surgery research is limited. This is in part due to the lack of inclusion of the Global South in existing vascular data registries. We recommend that including a greater number of low and middle income countries in these vascular data registries would allow us to better assess the quality of vascular surgeon care as well as the amount of access that is truly available. It would also allow us to better assess the impact of increased vascular surgeon access on patient outcomes. In conclusion, we found that large regional disparities are evident globally with regards to not only the burden of disease, but also the level of access to vascular surgeons. We believe that it is eminent to identify mechanisms to expand the global vascular surgeon workforce, as there is a real need to shift the focus from not only identifying challenges, but also identifying solutions to these disparities. I'd like to thank my mentor, Dr. Gaffey, and I welcome any questions.
Dr. Humphries?
I was wondering if you looked at renal failure, dialysis, or diabetes, because where I work in Tanzania, they have a ton of diabetes. And when I was there, what was fascinating to me is peripheral artery disease isn't even on their radar, but diabetes is. And then there are these patients, a lot of patients who are have renal failure and undergoing dialysis, which that's probably the area what we have discovered where we can do the greatest benefit. So did you look at those things?
We did not, but I do agree that that would be a worthwhile inquiry, since we did find that in some regions when trying to quantify access to vascular surgeons, it seemed that peripheral artery disease didn't seem to be front of mind for a lot of countries. And like you said, diabetes and dialysis tended to come up a little bit more. So definitely a worthwhile inquiry in the future.
So this all seems to be driven, though, by ischemic stroke, not by lower extremity disease. And so given that most ischemic strokes, or a large percentage of them, are cardiac related and not carotid, so are we kind of looking at the wrong thing here, is my first question. The second one is, many countries now that have socialized medicine recommend against treating asymptomatic carotids because it takes too many to treat to be able to prevent one stroke. So how do we reconcile that with your data, and how do we actually do something moving forward versus, doing Misty's thing, looking at dialysis and amputations and some of those things?
Yeah, absolutely. So we were a bit limited in how we could stratify ischemic stroke to only account for the things that we could actually intervene on, or that vascular surgeons could actually intervene on, due to the way that the database is set up. However, I do think that kind of refining it a little bit more and making sure that we're only including cardiovascular disease that can be intervened upon by vascular surgeons would make the analysis more exact and allow us to better quantify how much access is really needed.
This is a great study, and we need more studies like this to look at the global burden of vascular disease. I wonder, with PAD, looking at that specifically, if the data set will show you of all the patients who died who also had PAD, so not dying from PAD, that's kind of hard to show, but is a risk factor for death. I think that would be really interesting.
Yeah. Again, the database didn't allow for that. We had kind of the same thinking throughout the project, but we weren't able to utilize risk factors in this analysis. However, if we did have that ability, I think that would be, again, a worthwhile thing to do.
Thank you.
Dr. Brook?
Nice talk. And I suspect the global burden of disease is highly under sort of appreciated, just in terms of, a lot of these patients are dying of ruptured aneurysms that they're not getting autopsies. So, we're not being able to diagnose or get the true burden of disease. My only comment is, Dr. Tefera, who's a vascular surgeon, who's leading the American College of Surgeons Operation Giving Back, he came to our institution recently and said that he's trying to get together a group of vascular surgeons around the country to basically put their name down to volunteer to go to some of these places in Ethiopia, Rwanda, other countries, to be on kind of a rotating basis. Because he said the problem is, you can go and volunteer a couple weeks of your time in one of these places, but unless you have the continuity of vascular surgeons that are coming on a monthly, weekly basis, you really don't kind of move the needle. So if anybody's interested in this room and doing something you can just go to their website and just say that you're a vascular surgeon and you actually want to participate, because I know he's trying to get a list of people around the country that are willing to kind of donate a couple weeks or even a month of their time to do that. So. Absolutely.
And I think one important finding in our literature review was that there's a real interest within the vascular surgery departments globally, in not only South Africa, but Brazil and Ethiopia, et cetera. There's a real interest to kind of build up their workforce. So it kind of goes both ways. And an excellent example of that is the exchange between Sweden and Ethiopia, where Swedish vascular surgeons came over and trained with the only vascular surgeon in Ethiopia on open surgeries, and then the Ethiopian vascular surgeon went back over to Sweden and got to train on endovascular procedures. So it's kind of this trade in knowledge. I think the harder piece is maybe building up that infrastructure, but when considering projects that kind of focus on this cross-cultural collaboration, it's important to, like you said, kind of prioritize making it something that can last and something that can benefit the country, whether the American surgeons are still there or not. So thank you for that.
Have you considered adding another layer in your analysis of the percentage of GDP spent on healthcare as it influences the burden of cardiovascular disease and outcomes?
We have not yet, but thank you for that. That's very interesting.
Thank you. Great job.
All right, thanks.